Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the Stamping with Sara webisode. Today I'm excited to show you a super versatile stamp set from hot off the press called Happy Hello, Love, and Thanks. I've got 4 projects to share with you today using the stamps in combination with the Flit and Flutter paper collection from Paper Wishes. I'm also going to add some touches of dimension with gold and black embossing powder. So let's take a closer look at our stamp set. As I mentioned, this is a really versatile set. You've got 40 clear silicone stamps here. There are 4 large words plus lots of coordinating words, so you can mix and match between the sentiments. You can also mix and match in between those fonts as well. And there are also some small accent elements here too with those little hearts which come in handy. Now, of course, hot off the press, they always like to give you some project inspiration on the back of the package. Here's a really beautiful card from Lene. Now, this is an ideal set for card makers. Then our paper collection is a 12 by 12 set, which contains 12 coordinating sheets. And you can see images of the pages here on the front, but we can also flip through and you can see those beautiful illustrations here. Now these are 12 coordinating sheets. They are double-sided. You'll have 2 each of 12 different designs. You can see those beautiful butterflies, really gorgeous florals, and the colors are really beautiful and versatile. Now you also have some cutout elements in here as well, perfect for stamping a sentiment in there. And these are simple to cut out between the rectangles and those beautiful borders in here too. And then you've also got a sheet of cutouts to go along. So as you can see, we've got some beautiful papers perfectly coordinated with our stamps. Now, just a quick reminder about our stamping subscription before we jump into our demos. This webisode series has a coordinating subscription where you'll have early access to the stamps I'm using, delivered right to your door and at a discount. Plus, you'll receive some really fun goodies to go along. I'm so glad you're here today, so let's start stamping. Let's start with this card, which uses the Hello stamp with black embossing powder to create a high impact focal stamped and embossed on this piece of pattern paper. Now, embossing is a classic stamping technique, so let's have a look at how easy it is to do. I'll move aside my card and I'm going to bring in a couple of tools that I'm working with. First of all, I want to point out that I'm working onto my craft mat. This is a heat-resistant surface, and it will also protect my work surface too. Now, I'm working with a Misty stamp positioner. You can also do this technique, of course, with one clear acrylic block. So I'm going to open this up. Now, I do have a piece of cardstock already secured in place here, and I'll just open up this Misty. Now what I need to do with my stamp is just simply pull this off of the liner sheet like so. And then I can set the rest of this aside and I can position my stamp right where I want it to go, like so. And then I can close this up, kind of gently press this, and then I've got my stamp clinging to the other side of my Misty. So I'm ready to go there. Now, a couple of other things I want to have on hand. I want my embossing powder, of course, and I'm using the black. Then I also need to have my clear embossing ink pad. So you'll notice on here that this is ultra slow drying. This is what we want because we have a limited open time to work with our embossing. Now, the other thing I do have on hand here too is a piece of scrap paper which I've folded. This is going to catch my excess embossing powder after I do my embossing. Okay, so let's grab the ink pad here, and I'm just going to ink up my stamp like I would if I was stamping it normally, and tap that on there. Now the only trick is, of course, that clear embossing ink and a clear stamp means that this is really difficult to see, especially on camera. A little bit easier when you're in person. So I'm just going to press this down here, lift this up, and then I'm just going to grab a damp cloth, kind of clean that off quickly, slide aside my magnets, and get my piece of cardstock here. So I've got that. I'll move this aside, and then I'm going to grab that piece of folded scrap paper here, and I'll take my embossing powder and sprinkle this right on top. Now, You can be pretty generous here because all of the excess embossing powder will go right back into the jar. Okay, so I'll tap that off. And one little tip, I always like to have a very small, fine, dry paintbrush on hand, and then I can kind of shimmy away any stray granules of embossing powder. Okay, so I think I've got those all out of the way. I'll take my folded piece of paper here and then just funnel that embossing powder right back into the jar. So you can see a little goes a long way. Okay, put the lid back on there. And now positioning my piece again onto my heat resistant surface, I'm going to do my heat embossing. So I'll bring in my embossing tool and we'll heat set this and melt that embossing powder. All right, so I've got my embossing powder all melted and I have a raised and shiny word. So simple and easy to do. It's one of those classic techniques. So let me show you again on my card here how I've used this. And I've stamped and embossed the word onto the pattern paper. Here's the pattern paper that I'm using. So I've got this beautiful floral and butterfly motif, and I've also got those lines on there so you can see which section that I've used here, stamping directly on top of that butterfly image. And then I've die cut the piece into an oval shape, and I'm using the 12 ovals and scalloped dies, and that's going to give me the smooth oval as well as the scalloped. So I've got this nested effect here. And I've layered this using the Flit and Flutter cardstock pack. So you can see those beautiful blues that I've got in here. Those are 12 by 12, by the way, and so you get a lot in there to be able to do your layering. And of course, I know it's going to match perfectly with my patterned papers. And before I've done my layering here, I've also added some blending ink around the outside edges here. And I'm using the Stormy Night ink pad, and I've got a blending brush on hand here too. This is a really easy technique to do as well. So again, working onto my craft mat, I'm just going to grab my blending brush and pick up some of the ink from my ink pad. And this is a dye-based ink pad, so it's going to blend really easily, really nicely. And I'm working kind of from my craft mat onto the pattern paper with a circular motion. Now start with a light touch because you can always add more, but you can't take it away. So depending on how much intensity you want to have on that color, the more or less ink you want to use. So that again is using the Stormy Night, which just coordinates really nicely with the pattern paper. So let me mop this up using the same damp cloth I used to clean my stamp with. And there we go. So the rest of the card is really simple. I've glued the blue pattern paper to the card front, leaving a narrow border of white down at the bottom. And then I accented around the edges with the Stormy Night and the blending brush, also around the oval here too. And then I've added a scalloped edge with a thin line dazzle in gold. Let me show you these. A nice variety of different patterns on there, and I've used the scallop, which of course coordinates nicely with the scalloped edge of my die cut piece. Then on the card inside, I have another piece of pattern paper. I've got another little strip of dark blue cardstock and another dazzle border, plus the Miss You sentiment, which is from the Script Dazzle set. And these sheets have a lovely script font message, plus lots of little heart accents. And you can see that I've used 2 of them here on the front of the card. And then on the inside, I have another stamped and embossed heart from the stamp set. This card follows the same format, also stamping onto the pattern papers, and in this case, embossing with gold embossing powder. Now here I've stamped and embossed the large word love with the small I and the U added to create a phrase. Now on the stamp set, you've got lots of different options for mixing and matching the words. So for example, here's the love and the I and the U that I've used, but of course you can do some other combinations. So for example, with the word happy, you've got so very happy, and then you can add for you underneath. And the more you look at this, the more you start to see all of the different possible combinations. Now, when I'm doing a combination of words, very often I will just stamp and emboss all of the words in one go. So you can do them individually, but I like to do it all in one process. Let's have a look here. I'm going to again bring in my Misty. And I've got my stamps all arranged here together. So all three of the stamps are set to go. And you can use the grid lines printed on your Misty to help you align the words the way you want them to go. Okay, so I'm going to open this up again, and same process as before. I'll ink this up with my embossing ink pad, and then close this up. Lift this up again, give this a quick clean, and again working quickly to get my piece of cardstock. Now because I'm embossing with the gold rather than the black, I'm using a different piece of scrap paper to catch my embossing powder. You don't want to get them mixed because sometimes you do get some stray granules still in the fold of that cardstock. Okay, kind of tap that off. Again, just give a quick little go round with my brush and make sure that I've got all of those little granules off there. And then get my embossing powder back into the jar. Lid on the jar, very important before you do your heat setting. And then I'll get my embossing tool and we'll melt this embossing powder. So that embossing powder has melted and I've got this beautiful golden shine on here. It's so pretty. So once I've done my stamping and embossing, I die cut this piece using the 12 circle and scallop die. So the same format as our ovals, but in circles. So this means that I've got the smooth edge around here, and then I've also got the scalloped edge as well. Now, I've done some inking around the outside edge here too, and I'm using two different ink pads for this. I'm using the Cocoa Bean, and I'm also using the Velvet Fawn. And so for the Cocoa Bean, I've done my blending with my brush, and then I've done some direct to paper inking with the Velvet Fawn. So I'll just demo with this here. Let me grab my brush, and once again working from my craft mat directly onto my cardstock. I can blend this color right on here. Again, as much or as little as I want to use. So I've got my darker of the two colors here, and then what I did is I took the Velvet Fawn, which is a lighter shade, and just added a little bit of a shadow effect on here. So tap that along the edge, and you can see how that gives a really nice shadow effect there. So then let me grab once again my baby wipe and just clean up that color on there. So I've added this shadow effect around the circular portion here. I've also added it along the outside edges of my patterned paper. Now I do want to show you something with the patterned paper here that I've used on the front of my card. This is the paper, so this is the position that those corners are supposed to go on. But I've turned this around because I really like that blue flower there, and I thought it would be okay to cover up even that beautiful butterfly with my circular portion here. And then I've got this really pretty flower kind of growing up around the bottom and the side, and then those little tendrils off to the side there as well. So that's what I've done to create the front of my card. So I have this cut down, matted onto some light brown cardstock, and then glued onto the front. And then my finishing touch is a little piece of jute twine. It comes in a nice pack like this. And I've just tied that into a bow and then glued that right on to the front of my card. Now for the card inside, I added solid cardstock and then layered pattern paper on top. And the pattern paper was also inked, as with the paper on the front. There's another thin line dazzle here, and then the Happy Anniversary dazzle set, which is one of my favorites. And it goes together really nicely with our love message on the front here too. And that set has some small interlocking hearts, which I've used on the front as well. And then I've got another circle and scallop circle to present that message. In the paper pack, there are gorgeous cutout pieces that have just the right amount of space for the large word sentiments. So here I'm stamping the thanks and for all you do right into this open area here with these beautiful birds. But have a look at some of these other designs. They're just perfect for fitting in the large and the small words here. So I've done my stamping and embossing with gold embossing powder. And I want to point out here too, I've also got some embossing going along the edges of the cardstock focal, the matting piece, and the card itself. This is another really nice technique to have on hand for embossing, and also a really simple one too. Now, just in the interest of being able to see the contrast, I think we'll do this with our black embossing powder. So I've got my folded piece of scrap paper that I have used for my black embossing powder. You can tell there's still a little bit in here. And so what I'll do is simply decant a little bit of this right into that fold. So I've got it right inside here, kind of contained either side. And then from here, I'm going to take my paper cardstock, whatever I want to do my embossing on. I'll take my clear embossing ink pad, and I'm going to do the direct to paper inking technique the same way as we just saw with that velvet fawn, but using it with my embossing ink pad. Now you can hold this perpendicular to your cardstock for just a very fine line, or you can angle that embossing ink pad more toward the surface for something more dramatic, which is what I'm going to show you here. And then just dip the edge into your embossing powder. So you've got some nice edging on here. So once again, I'll get the rest of this embossing powder back into the jar. And then we can heat set this for a really bold and dramatic line. So hang in there with me, and I'll heat set this and melt this edge. Okay, so this is all melted, and now I have this raised, shiny edge along my cardstock. Now you probably noticed that I did heat set from the top to make sure that this all melts, but I also wanted to make sure that any little granules that I have on the back or along the edge itself do melt as well. Otherwise, they can transfer to the other areas of your card, maybe where you don't want them to go. So that's what I've done here around the outside edges. First covered my card front with the green cardstock, and I made sure to glue it firmly in place because you are adding heat to the cardstock itself, so you want to make sure that the cardstock is held down really firmly. And then I've got this going around my matted piece as well as my focal there too. And then I've added a heart dazzle here as well as a little bow tied in 1/8 inch ribbon. And this is another nice ribbon set that I like to use, and just glued that right on there, and it adds a nice little touch of softness. Then for the card inside, I have a couple of thin line dazzles to go behind the stamped and embossed sentiment, which is also edged with gold. Our final project features a double embossing technique that works really well with contrasting colors like the black and gold. So first I've stamped and embossed the word with black, and then I've over embossed it with a second layer of gold. And this is a really easy process to do and will give you a different look just about every time. So let's have a look at how to do this. Now in this case, I really do find that a stamp positioner or a MISTI is going to be really helpful, because you want to stamp your word or your image in exactly the same place twice. So I've got my word on one side, and then I've got a piece of cardstock here on the other side. So the first thing I'm going to do is stamp and emboss with the black. So I've got my black embossing powder, I've got my black embossing powder catcher over here, and then again I'm just going to ink this up as before, and then stamp and emboss as we've done earlier. So this exact same technique, round one. Okay, so position this down here and lift this back up, and then quickly dab off the ink. I'm going to keep the stamp in place, just close this up for now and set it off to one side, and then I'm going to do my embossing. So again, just adding that black embossing powder right on here. Tap off and brush off any excess. And then I'm going to do the same process as before and heat set my piece. Clean up a little bit of a spill here first, and then we'll get ready for the first round of our embossing. So hang in there with me while I heat set this, and then we'll be ready for round two. Okay, so my embossing powder is all melted, and I've got my beautiful shiny word here. Now what I'll do is bring back in my MISTI, and remember I've got my stamp still in the same place. I'm going to leave that there, and then I'm going to position my cardstock exactly where it was before. So slide my magnet in there and make sure that I've got this right up in the corner there. Get those magnets back in place. And now I'm going to repeat the process, but with gold embossing powder. So once again, ink this up, and then close my MISTI. Open this up again. Dab that off and set this out of the way. Now, because I want to use my gold embossing powder, I'm going to grab my gold embossing powder scrap paper here. And instead of covering this entirely, I'm just going to tap off a little bit of the gold in certain areas of the word. So maybe I want to cover the entire top half or bottom half, or just let it go randomly on here. Kind of tap from underneath to get some more coverage, and then tap off the excess. And again, funnel that back in, and then we're going to heat set this again and have a look at that two-tone effect. And there we go. Now this is, again, a really fun way to get a variety of different looks, and I think it looks beautiful with the black and the gold, but you can combine any of your embossing powder colors. So it may open up some new ways of looking at some of your other embossing powder colors and some fun and different ways to combine them. So after doing my embossing, I've die cut the piece into a rectangle, and I'm using the 12 rectangle and scalloped dies for this. So I've got my straight edge, and then I've got my scalloped piece here. And I've edged this with gold embossing powder. Plus I've used the word anniversary. And this is from that Happy Anniversary Dazzle set that I used on the previous card. Here you can see some of the little heart accents that are also included on there. So I've added one of the hearts and then the word there as well. And the front of my card is covered with pattern paper. Let me show you this. So this is, again, using one of the pattern papers from the collection, but in a way that is perhaps a little bit different than it's supposed to be used. So I've got this section here down at the bottom. I really like those flowers here, so I've covered the bird up with our rectangle scallop, and then I've got this really pretty border going along the outside edge. So that's the portion that I've used on that 12 by 12 pattern paper, and that creates a really nice frame for my message. And I've also done some inking with the cocoa bean and the velvet fawn around the outside edge. I've got a gingham bow tied in here for a little bit of extra texture. And then for the card inside, I have the I love you dazzle message, plus one of the thin line dazzles that I've placed as a curve. And this is a fun way to use those dazzles. It's kind of like underlining the text. So they're a little bit flexible there too. The piece is edged with gold, with the gold embossing, and then it's matted onto the scalloped rectangle. And I've got another little heart on here as well. And this is our final project of the day today. So thank you so much for joining me today. The stamps and the paper pack that I've used are available in a money saver, and you can see that special offer on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, as you probably know, we do have a really fantastic membership, and we've got our monthly Stamping with Sara subscription. This is a lot of fun. You'll be the first to receive the stamp of the month. You'll get that before the webisode airs, and you'll save 10% on the retail price. You also get a free goodie each month, plus a free gift with your membership. And the free gift is the wood grain stamp set. You can see a little image of it right here. This is one of my favorites for background designs. And this is all shown on the right-hand side of the screen. If you happen to be watching us on YouTube, we'd love for you to subscribe and give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. And please do join us on paperwishes.com. This is the only place you will find this fabulous membership subscription. You'll also see that we create 6 webisodes every week to inspire your creative spirit. Thank you again for joining me today. We're really so glad you're here, and we're happy you're a part of our Paper Wishes family. Do feel free to leave a comment. We love to hear what you think. I'll see you again next month for another episode of Stamping with Sara.